Test. There we go. Yeah. We probably did not have audio at the initial part there, but there we go. I caught it as it was happening though, so did not need chat to politely inform me that I was muted. Hey everyone, how's it going? So, I'm not in a huge rush to start right out of the gate because I posted this relatively early, with little notice. Yeah, there we go. Wanted to give viewers a chance to float in a little bit before I start fully explaining myself. However, I'm also mindful some of you are watching this after the fact or have zipped back to the start, so I don't want to do it too much. But we are going to be doing something a little different today. I guess with that in mind, I will kind of start with an initial small explanation. I don't really... That light's kind of doing something funny. So now's a good time for me to fiddle around with that a bit. How does that look? That's better. Okay. So, yeah, the idea is we're doing something a little different. This is not like the live editing sessions where we kind of give you guys a bit of a peek behind the scenes, but those are really only live streams, and then otherwise that's available for members or patrons only. This will be available to anyone who's watching whenever. It's also not producing a Comic Island script, to be clear. We're writing a more traditional screenplay. Shadowcatcher says this is new. Yeah, this is something that's happening for a couple of reasons, but we're doing a couple of things here at once. First of all, it's just a fun activity that I think once you guys kind of see and once we get going, it'll just be interesting. But two is, this is me just sort of live developing a writing portfolio, which is something I've always wanted to do and technically have a very vast and complicated portfolio already. But as I'm kind of advancing that career in that direction at the encouragement of my partner and stuff, which I really appreciate because I've been lollygagging on it otherwise, I am going to be kind of seeing what my options are as a writer and stuff, because I do have this background in writing. As a critic, I'm often accused of I've been told I don't think anyone should criticize something unless they're a published writer before it. I was like, okay, but I am a published writer. I actually disagree with that assertion. I think that's unfair and gatekeeping, but I pointed out to it I am a published writer, just not of fiction or comics. My background's more in science, and my name's attached to a bunch of journal papers out there. But I've always felt my writing skills and tendencies kind of go beyond that, and I kind of want to get more into fiction writing. So a big part of that is just kind of making scripts, refining technique, and also just coming up with a bunch of samples. And we're kind of doing this on a couple of fronts. So I am generating these samples to submit, potentially, and I guess it's worth pointing that out just to be honest with you guys, but that's the point of this whole discussion at the beginning anyways. And Sabinur says, what's going on? Oh, don't worry, I'm explaining it. And but the other thing is these videos are going to just be left up publicly kind of for potential employers and stuff to see, and because it's something that I've talked about a lot, and I have done this once before, just so you guys know, about a few things. One is that I can write anything, and two is that I can kind of work writing on an assignment and work within a very specific time period, over the course of a stream, and produce something meaningful. So it is a way I'm just sort of, this is an addition tape, but also it's also to kind of show and kind of be a lesson in screenwriting a little bit and how I tend to view writing. Because I have that background in science, I tend to look at it a little differently, but I have done lessons and stuff on screenwriting and know a great deal about writing in fiction too, but I do have a different perspective. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not necessarily an expert in that regard. 75 Starfish says, write a story about a barbarian with a big pet cat who has to fight an evil skeleton man. Well, see, that sounds cool, and I certainly appreciate that. But what we're doing is we're actually going to be just taking a cue at random, in a true random sense. And I'm going to kind of show you guys what I mean by that. But it's based on kind of this internal thesis of mine of like, I could write a script about anything, and I'm also more. I've always kind of viewed myself as like an adaptive screenwriter. I take existing ideas and sort of make something new out of it. I'm not a big hoity-toity writer in terms of like my aspirations don't really arrive at the idea of making truly original fiction so much as reflective, interesting fiction, and one that kind of doesn't exist independently of the world around us. So I guess I'm rambling a little bit about technique there and like philosophy about writing, but the larger thing is kind of just to show like, well, no, I can take any idea. Like if you have a well fleshed out, interesting, often decades old franchise, we can take these things and find something new from there or make something interesting. And I often talk, like we just had a stream where we're going through the Black Widow movie and what I found disappointing about it. And if you go across a lot of my reviews, you'll find the stuff that I tend to get most frustrated with and get most like held up by is writing. And I think writing is really essential to the quality of something. So this is also me kind of showing, well, these are the kind of things I write. So I already did this once with the DC Wiki. I took a random page. Maybe that's a good way to start, is just to show you guys what I was talking about. I went to DC's Wiki, typed in random page, and it took me to the name of this writer. 75 Starfish says, thank you saw what I was doing. A barbarian with a big hat. Oh my god, I didn't catch that. It's He-Man. But I almost, like, even following up on that, like, we're going to start with Marvel, which is more of a comfort zone for people and stuff, and I've already done this once with DC, but my plan is to kind of do this for other franchises too. I think the next one for me that I want to do after this is something like Trek, and then after that, like, maybe something from the Final Fantasy franchise. I think this works best with complicated, storied franchises with a lot of layers, but I think it'll work with most of them. Anyways, and this isn't like a perfect script. I kind of did one pass over, so we'll call this like a second draft, but I would probably want to go through it a little bit more. But I hit the random page on DC's Wiki. It took me to the writer of a single story from one of the Batman black and white books, the new ones that just came out last year. So I went and found that Batman black and white book, read the story, and it was this little ditty about Hugo Strange, but also a kind of story that I felt like I had seen before. It wasn't exactly word for word something I had seen, but it was an old narrative about Batman, and it left me kind of dissatisfied about like, well, you know, we see this Batman story a lot. So what I took from that wiki page is really just, what kind of story would I tell that hasn't been told with Batman that I'd like to see in the screen? And I kind of crafted this Batmage story about a Batman that wields magic and lives in an alternate universe Gotham, is sort of a distinct character in how he uses his powers, but kind of uses them to a similar effect to the Batman we know, with like scaring the crap out of criminals, but with all the power of magic doing it. And then this version of Batman battles a centuries-old Hugo Strange, who's this sort of master sorcerer that has all these powers and stuff. You know, also pretty simple stuff, but would be new for the world of, like, film or, like, the more adaptive nature of DC's content and that sort of thing. And also something that had been rummaging around in my head for a while. Around this part, I kind of describe the situation where, like, Batman, this version of Batman, just controls a swarm of bats and they turn into a giant black head that's chasing after this van full of criminals, just knocking them out of the vehicle but leaving them completely unharmed because you have this powerful mage who can do something like that. It's pretty simple stuff, but that's like kind of what we're doing. So I don't know if I've explained myself super well, but I think as we kind of get the ball rolling, you guys will see what it is. But also, if you can't tell, like, the the thread of thought between hitting that random page button and getting to the final version of the script was one that kind of weaved, and I added a lot of things. And so it's not just like I have to go by whatever random page I hit. I say that in part because I might get boxed in some weird way and have to kind of go off the beaten path of what is actually on whatever this wiki page is. So we have our new document here, but what we're really starting with is this web page here. I have no real particular love for Fandom, the website that hosts this, or anything like that. However, I do love an active wiki with lots of web pages and stuff, and I am a fan of Wikipedia for learning about stuff, and also just like being able to stumble onto things. Now, I see random character and random comic, but my preferred method for doing something like this is random page. And Fandom these days has been kind of a little funny about that. And this should also be everything, which it appears to be. I don't want just the MCU or something like that. And 75 Starfish says, oh, okay, how about a crime fighter who comes out of the closet? Is he as effective without the angst? And then Tevi Soka, thanks for joining us. You know, I think that sort of thing has been explored before. So, okay, if we can't do it this way, there is a way to do it that I've already figured out. Random, I think. We'll just do it. Yep, there we go. Remulambo, Earth 3 F Earth 98193. Okay, so we're already off to an interesting start. There is, so this is gallery. We'll go to his main page. It doesn't, you know, we keep going until I have something to work with. I know nothing about this. What is this? Gambit has been briefly glimpsed in an interview with Vulcan as a member of the X-Men. Was briefly glimpsed. What issue is this? What if X-Men Deadly Genesis #1? Well, now that's interesting. Alrighty. So it's what if Xavier's secret second team had survived from all that Deadly Genesis stuff. Interesting. So that's, okay, so that's a lot. It's a lot in the sense of, like, okay, there's a lot of options there. Nothing from Deadly Genesis, let alone this what if story, has ever been adapted into the screen and stuff like that. And I was going to talk about this a little bit. Like, I'm not super concerned about the MCU or anything like that. It's more of just creating a story, and however that story might be adapted is beyond to me. It's more about just like, well, what kind of story would we tell with all this material, and what would be interesting? What could you introduce the audience to, like, in something succinct like this? And to be honest, it feels like, well, we might have to scale it all the way back to something as simple as, like, Krakoa, is what I'm kind of wondering. That's a whole other thing in the X-Men. And I'm not, yeah, okay. This is the other version of Krakoa from Earth 98193. We don't know. I'm just looking up our main guy. Because here's my thing. So, like, the Batmage story was easy in some ways because it's like, well, everyone knows who Batman is. So I just kind of jumped in. I was like, well, we're telling an ultimate story of Batman. That should be pretty immediately apparent once the dude starts learning magic. Here we have to think about, like, well, what the heck do we start with here? Because there's so many layers to this. We started basically with the alternate universe X-Men Gambit character, which is interesting. And then under that layer is, like, all of Deadly, like, the what if Deadly Genesis story. And then under that layer is Deadly Genesis. And then under that layer is Giant Size X-Men #1. None of which has ever been told. But the more I'm talking about it, it's like, okay, well, that is so much to try and, like, introduce and grapple with in one little screenplay where this isn't necessarily even supposed to be movie length. This is kind of as long as it needs to be. I don't necessarily intend to finish the whole thing, but rather just produce a lot until I have a strong sense of, like, where the story's gonna go. Because odds are we are gonna, like, stream this script again. I'll finish the script on my own time and we move on from there. So what I'm thinking is actually maybe scaling things back a little bit. And instead of really focusing on any of like this business, 75 star fish says, all right, Batman versus tree looking man. That's like Krakoa in some sort of human form that we briefly saw there. But I'm actually thinking, rather than focusing on Vulcan or Deadly Genesis or Krakoa or anything like that, which feels a little unwieldy for what is essentially a spec script, like an example script to show what kind of talents we have. And rather, it's like, well, they never actually made a Gambit movie and stuff. Let's maybe focus on this character a little bit and think about, like, what kind of story would I want to tell with a Gambit? Now, the only downside with that is already, like, my brain's tinkering a little bit and thinking, okay, well, what's different about this character? What's unique? What do people like? I think there's a lot of things that appeal with him, from his appearance and cool powers to the fact that he is Cajun from New Orleans. In particular, that's where my brain's leading. Unfortunately, it's also, that puts me in an interesting spot, because I do believe I can do this, but I don't have that like New Orleans experience and stuff, so I will have to deal with that a little bit. And my instinct is just, okay, well, I should delve into New Orleans and like read a book about its history and learn a little more about that, which we can do, but I don't want to be like sitting here reading live too much or anything along those lines. And then the other thing is, and the concern with that, yeah, this is just everything that he's been through, on just his wiki page. I was just looking for ideas and stuff, because my other, or like just images even to inspire me a little, because my other concern is, if we focus too much on like New Orleans content, we don't want to really stumble into an origin story either, because typically I find that boring. Is Gambit's origin story that boring? I don't know. 75 Starfish is saying, don't forget his relationship with the Guild of Thieves and how he interacts with Rogue. See, that's really interesting. I was thinking about the Guild of Thieves and stuff too, and that's where it's like, well, I don't know if we necessarily want to shy away from his origins completely, because like he's got that whole history that goes kind of back to his beginning. The other thing that Starfish just kind of made me think of, which I actually hadn't thought of too, is romance is kind of a key element of his character, and his romance with Rogue might be kind of interesting. It feels like that's kind of a little bit of an underplayed element of comic book fiction, especially in like the umbrella of the MCU, so maybe that might be a very fun way to do that and to look at that. 75 Starfish is also saying Remy Beau is one of the most interesting Marvel characters, and I think that's why I was taking a moment to go over his wiki too, because I agree. Between like the early stuff with the Mutant Massacre to later on, like they're talking about Horsemen with Apocalypse and becoming like a more robust part of the X-Men. There's a lot of stuff just kind of lying on the table here, and oh, when did that happen? Apparently they got married. I feel as though there's a lot of, 2018, so that's how I didn't hear about this. But if we focus on the more romantic side of it, I kind of think that might be an interesting way of going about it. That's... Oh, right. There's this series. Is this still going? I don't know what Gambit's been up to in like the most recent times. Right, okay, so this is the married. Oh, and this is kind of their final issue. By the looks of it. Okay. So what's Gambit been up to lately? That might be worth checking in on, actually. We can do that down here, I think. I haven't, I don't know. There's so much stuff going on with the X-Men. I'm guessing that's when he first appears. Oh, what is this one? Last. Yeah, that looks about right. Oh, so he's kind of around in Excalibur. Okay. Well, this is all very interesting. So there's a lot to go on. One thing I do generally prefer is like to kind of zero in on something a little bit, and that's why I like the random pages. Usually it can be a little more specific than that. It might point me to a certain issue or something. This one did. It's just such a big issue and so layered that my instinct wasn't to use it too much. But one thing I am wondering is, like, origin story might not be my initial instinct, but that might not deal with a lot with his first appearance, which is kind of a more interesting thing. This is a Chris Claremont story. Ahab's in it, which is pretty fun too. Days of Future Present. Okay. I'm trying to remember how Gambit was introduced. It's like the first true appearance, not a cameo. Okay. I'm wondering if he had a little cameo before that or something. It's interesting. I might grab that book in a second and take a look at it. Now, I know I'm just talking for a lot of this and it's quiet, but you have to kind of, like, I can't just start writing. I need to plan and have a solid idea and foundation before I just dive into things. So I just kind of want to get into things a little bit more. So yeah, it really does seem like his character's introduced over the course of these stories. Okay, I don't need those right now. I like the idea of a romance. It's interesting, Gambit's mostly just working with Storm at first. I'm just gonna read this a little bit. Right, okay. Right, so it's a lot of Chris Claremont's usual stuff. But it kind of feels like this is more like the focus of Gambit's character. But I think the idea is it's like a flashback. No intent to steal back the stolen paintings. Let's run right into Shem. Right, okay. So Gambit's introduction is kind of along the lines of him as a thief, and he can, like, you know, I feel like that's a lot of his early arcs and stories and how he can get introduced to things. But maybe instead of it kind of being paired with Storm, it might be more interesting to focus on Rogue in this kind of narrative. Starfish was saying, how about a modern day guild of thieves interact with the Gambit that's committed to the X-Men, and what does Rogue think of all that? See, I like that a little better too. Because the instinct is kind of to go from early days, or at least to maybe borrow from it here and there. And I wonder if, like, that would be using, like, the Shadow King or Storm a little bit. It's good to maybe know these characters were around in, like, Gambit's earliest days. He has, like, got all that stuff with Mr. Sinister, so that's on the table. So many characters are also involved in the story, but Gambit's more just kind of like a kind of early appearance, but really we get introduced to him in these Uncanny X-Men stories. Which is fine. I just, and that's how he gets introduced to the X-Men. Does he join them after that? Yeah. Not really. Oh, interesting. Okay, but Gambit does gradually kind of become a part of stuff. like over the course of a few series, and then more heavily involved in the mainline X-Men stuff as he reached popularity. So this is interesting though, and I didn't really think a lot about like other people kind of contributing ideas as we go along and stuff. I guess it really does come down to him and Rogue, but I think Starfish kind of has the right ideas of, and maybe we should start with like taking some notes here. I don't always have to do that if I have a really clear picture in my mind, but I don't as of yet. So I might just open a regular Word document for a second and kind of get some ideas out here until we have a little more something concrete, because it is kind of interesting. So I think what we want is like a modern, more established Gambit. I think like a light sense of the romance genre, but we still want it to have that kind of commons, like that thread of a superhero fiction, having action and excitement along with that. I just feel like the same way that they have more comedic superhero movies, more actiony stuff, and you can also maybe put in a little bit of romance or something like that, and that might be where Gambit's character is unique. I think while it's fun to have him as a more established X-Men character, I would maybe want to focus on a smaller story with these two right now. Like the idea is we kind of want a Gambit story, so like a focus on these characters. But I also don't want people to feel cheated out of like a world with the X-Men and stuff like that. So finding ways to include them or to feel like it's part of that world, I think would be important. Whatever that world might look like. I also, we don't want it to be all just about world building or making fan fiction or anything like that. We want to kind of craft something here. The Guild of Thieves are interesting. I kind of like that because a lot of the other ideas that are coming out of here, like Apocalypse or what's his face, Mr. Sinister and stuff, kind of feel more explored, whereas the Guild of Thieves is a lot more ambiguous and interesting. Thieves Guild. And that could kind of be fun. The immediate appearance of Black Cat's kind of fun too. I didn't really think about that too much either. And I'm just looking at what other characters might be interested. Okay. That's a fun connection, though. Like, the other big thief in the world of Marvel also has a history with, what's it called? Black Cat. But I'm curious if there aren't, like, other characters that might be kind of fun for that or something. But, yeah. So, okay. I guess in Thieves Guild might be a cool addition to that. Thieves Guild. I still haven't... Oops. Yeah, it's more a spot like that. I'm curious about, like... I just need something, a little more of an arc or something. Normally when I get started on these things, I have like a real clear direction or something. So maybe just kind of fiddling around in here until I kind of get that. Like Black Cat's an interesting connection. I guess my only struggle is it's like, well, are we gonna like rope in the one other character that's like a thief, or are there other characters that could potentially work along those lines? And then I was starting to think about like other villains and corners of the MCU. We also did stumble on Gambit recently with Comic Island content and Brother Voodoo and stuff, and that's a partnership I think that's kind of underplayed in the world of Gambit because they're both from New Orleans, which would kind of be interesting. Starfish says you could create a lure for the Guild of Thieves and how that lure affects Gambit, including Black Cat flirting with him. Well, and then that's an interest, like that's a very well, I don't want to be too dismissive of it, but I'm saying like that's a real easy direction. It's like, oh yeah, we could have like that love triangle thing, and it kind of sounds fun too. Um, it gets into what I was saying about like building an existing connection. I just like that all feels real. Like, oh, that's very convenient for me is all, uh, and I don't want to fall into like an easy writing pattern or something. It's like what about this could make me really excited or interested? Like what little twist could we add that would be something? 35 is like, you're right, it's cliche. It's not that it's cliche, it's just like, well, we've seen that before. It falls into a lot of easy traps. And I'm already a little out of my comfort zone with romance and a culture that I'm not like attuned to per se. But this is also, I think this is good because it gets into the writing process. And it's interesting because the DC script, I was a lot quicker. I like had it more in my head, and I think I need to. The other thing too is sometimes, and this is unfortunate, but I might need just a little bit of time to gradually just kind of percolate through. And this is interesting because like the Thieves Guild goes way back, and they have like this ancient aspect to them. And that sort of thing. That's interesting actually, because okay. I know I didn't say anything just now, but I think I got something. So here's the thing. Let's talk a little bit about New Orleans. And I'm actually going to bring this up just to affirm what I'm saying, but we're going to kind of touch on stuff I already know a little bit, actually. Because, like I said, I haven't been to this city before. I would really like to visit sometime. Obviously, COVID's not very conducive to that sort of thing. Ideally, this script would allow me to maybe like read a whole book on New Orleans and visit, and not that like the script, so that I could kind of add to that. But what I do know about and can speak to a little bit more is this early history, because what's cool about New Orleans is it was like a French colony before like the Louisiana Purchase. There's a lot of interesting like culture to it that like kind of exists to this day, and those are all very interesting aspects of it. Like there's revolts and stuff, but I'm thinking just in that early history and okay, so this won't be easy to write, but there is a narrative there about like the ancient history of New Orleans and how. Oh, and here we have the little timeline of them right over here, which is perfect. So it was French from 1718 to 1763, then Spain took it over until the early 1800s, then France took it over again for a couple of years, which is Napoleon era, and then he sold it to the United States, kind of in secret, until it became like the state of Louisiana. Obviously, it was a confederacy for a brief period of time during the Civil War, and then has been just a part of the state since then. 75 Starfish is asking if Salem or Witches is part of New Orleans culture. I feel like it kind of takes place a little after that, and the French colonies were a little different than the British ones, which sort of grew. These were almost like trading posts for a while, and early fur posts. But what I'm thinking is, like, we're talking about theft, right? And the narrative to me becomes suddenly very obvious. It's all, like, that's where the challenge suddenly becomes, because I'm looking through this history page here, and I'm not going to read it all to you guys, but it's talking a lot about like the struggle these colonies had, struggle being a generous term for it, with the indigenous populations, but also African slaves, because like this was they almost started like black people for a while like really grew in population and almost started to outpopulate their white oppressors, leading to increased tension, which of course is a whole thing. It's also the Battle of New Orleans, but I don't think we need to get into that too much. But that is interesting because that's part of the war in 1812, and then obviously it was a slave state, so it was part of the Reconstruction movement too. So to me, I'm reading this history, it's like, oh, it's a history of theft. and that gets into what I was reading about the Thieves Guild here about, they kind of tie it to like the Manhattan Purchase from the Native Americans, and like its origins go back to 1831. But and that can be part of the story too, about how like it's this false history and it's even older than that, going back to the earliest days of New Orleans in like the 1700s, even earlier than what was established in the comics story here. And that, all of this that I'm describing here is that hook that I was talking about. I can write something about this that isn't on the nose politics, but gets into that history and stuff, and maybe becomes like this thing. I like Starfish's idea of it calling to Gambit from there, and maybe even that can help me a little bit with like contemporary New Orleans, which I know a little less about. Though I feel it kind of it's sliding more into this like this business district, this more typical modern city and stuff, where that character might be lost a little bit or threatened, which is maybe something to talk about too. Oh yeah, and then there's all the hurricanes too, which might kind of open up something for that, or maybe even give Gambit a reason to come. So I'm kind of thinking, okay, so we got my little early notes here. So early history of New Orleans, time to the guild. Maybe something gets shaken loose with the hurricane, but I'm kind of only really putting stuff on here that I really am firm about. And I'm even wondering if it has to take place in New Orleans or just the area around it and stuff, or like ruins under it, or like it could take place in different places or like different locations. But I kind of think it would be fun to really tie it to both the old identity of this world. 75 Starfish says, not knowing a lot about the culture allows you to put your own spin on it others might see. That's true. I just don't want to make it seem like I'm coming in and being like, oh, I could write about a city I've never been to and stuff. I think where I'm more confident about it now is it's like, okay, I have an angle to write with, that it's not just coming from pure ignorance. And now like if I'm really feeling this script and really believing it, it's like, okay, I can also come back to it and modify it a little bit with little details of nuance that could come from visiting there or watching some movies about it, or watching or like reading the book or something like that. Just add a little bit of nuance because you want it to have a sense of authenticity. You don't want everyone from Louisiana watching the like whatever the screenplay turns into and laughing at it because it's just completely divorced from reality. I also think, I don't want to overplay it too much. When I talk about these politics and stuff, I'm thinking about it like, okay, yeah, we want to write it, but we also don't want to write it where it's like a joke, where it's laughably on the nose, or where the only element of politics is like, yeah, like this city's always been about theft. I don't want it to be that deliberate. I want to talk about how like human it all is, and it's set in an alternate reality, which gives some flexibility. Well, I'm not worried about like the geography of the city or something like that. That is where that's where you're right. We are free to kind of have a little bit of fun with that. But I do want to kind of maybe talk a little bit, or like have this stuff be relevant. Like it feels like it gets into like, okay, what I'm thinking is we started out as a really typical heist. Maybe Gambit is on there for the Thieves Guild or something like that. Starts out as a typical heist. And like maybe Gambit is doing some kind of job ostensibly for the guild. So like we think that he's working for this organization at first. But it was really just stealing something powerful on behalf of the X-Men, but more of and their values. So, or we're gonna kind of like maybe Gambit's after some sort of powerful artifact or valuable MacGuffin, and he's getting it for the X-Men not so much because he thinks the X-Men need it, but that they would want it protected and out of the Thieves Guild hand and stuff. And then maybe like Rogue comes along to investigate, and the story's like making the bulk of the story. And then I'm kind of thinking, like, this is great. I think, oh, hello Akbar, thanks for joining us. I think we have a pretty solid outline of the script here that it's like, this is a solid story. It honestly, even as I'm taping out this outline, feels as though I'm kind of tapping into what is a movie or like maybe a long, like hour-long television show of some kind. So it's of a certain length. But I think it's like, this is good, but I think the lesson here for Gambit, so to speak, is not so much a history lesson, but one about being able to rely not just on his partner, Rogue, but also his team and stuff. And I think when we have these solo stories, we get the frustration is it's just Gambit's story, and it's like, well, where's the rest of the X-Men? Where's all his friends? Why aren't they helping him out of this pickle if this is supposedly a big deal? And I think how we circumvent that a little bit is at the end, the X-Men come and rescue Rogue and Gambit. And the lesson is kind of, yeah, you can trust these people and rely on them, and they won't judge you for this or anything. Like, they will like, still accept you or something. And I think that's the arc of this story, but also the excitement on this story. So we get a big show of like X-Men, and by X-Men I think I need to think about that a little bit too, about who shows up. But some X-Men show up at the end to help save the day. Now the challenge of that is we don't want it to feel like a cheat either. We still want it to kind of be Gambit's story and stuff, and it doesn't want to feel cheap or anything. So, but that will be the challenge of writing it along the lines. I do think one contender is Storm, just because she came up a lot in research and feels like an early history character, so it's just fun to include her. I'm kind of wondering what other characters might be, because we kind of want to build them into the story, and knowing who will show up might be worth kind of establishing early on. And I think, well, yeah, okay. I'm wondering if maybe we focus a little bit on characters just commonly associated with Gambit. Just sort of a little nod at some of the fun, like, associations he consistently has. I'm seeing names mentioned, but I want, like, a consistent presence. Akbar saying, I used to do some writing in the past when I was a kid. I remember enjoying it, although I doubt I was ever any good. I wish I'd done more. Well, you know, I never really stopped, because my relationship with that was that, like, kind of similar. And unfortunately, what I needed was someone just kind of in my corner, sort of cheerleading me to do stuff like this and getting a little more confidence and building it up. I'm just kind of flipping through to see, like, Gambit went with Wolverine during the schism, and Wolverine is a pretty consistent part of his character. He kind of was in my mind when we were talking about cameos, so I think that's our next one. I just want, like, a roster of X-Men to show up, and Akbar says, I'll be in your corner, man. I mean, anyone can do writing, which is interesting, and whether or not you're good, like, it's about developing and stuff. Part of the reason I'm feeling more confident is I've written hundreds of things at this point, and have, like, a resume and a background and stuff, and part of it is, you know, we've been spending 45 minutes here just talking my plans out, which I don't always have to do, like I said, but for something like this, I really need to. You need to kind of execute it and kind of have a strong idea of what we want this to look like. Okay. Oh, right. I forgot about that whole marriage thing. So Storm is again an important character of relative to Gambit, even early on. Uh, Quicksilver's also on here. Oh, and Polaris is pretty fun to join the new X Factor back when they were in their corporate days. Okay. Starfish and Akbar hanging out in chat. That's cool, guys. You've both been pretty chatty today, and I appreciate it. So I'm thinking Quicksilver. Everyone likes him, anyways. Like, we're not picking unpopular characters. And to round it out, Polaris. So we have a bunch of characters everyone will be familiar with. One that I still think Polaris is pretty unknown, even though she was in that Gifted show. So she can kind of be also sort of backdoor introduced. I almost want to treat this as an introduction for Gambit's character, even if he has shown up in movies before. We're not going to really do an origin story, but I do think this is worth doing. So, now I'm just thinking, I think, okay, I have a couple of thoughts. One is I think I'm going to take a break in a minute, just to let all this digest for a minute. Two is, while before I do that, I kind of want to out loud think about a little bit how we want this story to look. Akbar saying, Quicksilver has a very interesting background. His father, sister, a lot of stuff to work with. I've grown to find Flash's style and powers more and more intriguing. Now, I don't want them to be too much of this story, but I do kind of think it would be fun to... Like, I also want this to feel like Gambit is part of the X-Men. Gambit is part of this story. So what I was about to say is I kind of want to give a sense of, like, the script's as long as it needs to be. A screenplay, like the ones that some places want me to submit, are typically about 50 pages long, which is about movie length these days. The first script I wrote was like 11 pages long because I kind of viewed it internally as like the length of something like a Pixar short, which I just thought was funny because it's a Batman story, and I quite enjoyed writing that. This already feels more sophisticated, but like the goal here is to be telling a story of like the kind that I'd want to see on screen and stuff. And I don't want some simple standalone Gambit story per se. Like, we get so many of those with superheroes. And I think something more ambitious is almost called for, especially when seeing stuff like Black Widow or Spider-Man Far From Home kind of hit more mediocrity. So you don't want it filled with superheroes per se, but I also want it to feel like it's like, yeah, this is Gambit of the X-Men. It's not like him just going off on his own little adventure. Like, we're kind of past that in comic book stories. So I guess what I'm hedging on is, like, do we start at the X-Mansion and then go to New Orleans? I almost don't even think that's necessary. I think that's almost too much. So I kind of want, like, we got our little notes here. I kind of want to maybe make a little flow chart of sorts. We don't even need to graphically denote that, but maybe just numbers. So 1. Akbar saying, Gambit, if I'm correct, hasn't gotten a lot of attention lately. Might be a good character to focus on. Well, Akbar, you kind of missed the first part. The way we did this is I just hit random page on Marvel's Wiki, and it took me to this alternate version of Gambit that was part of this What If Deadly Genesis story. And so we talked about different options, about like different X-Men characters to focus on, including Deadly Genesis stuff, the giant size X-Men thing or whatever. And ultimately I kind of arrived at maybe just focusing on Gambit for now, because they wanted to make a Gambit movie and didn't. I think this is a really cool character which has that potential, and we kind of just went down that road, basically. I think Gambit's also a fun way to kind of introduce some romance into the world of like Marvel or something like that, without it feeling overplayed, but like just in the same way that a lot of other Marvel stuff explores different genres too, kind of like WandaVision or something. So 1, I think we do Gambit arrives at New Orleans. To meet with the Thieves Guild or something like that. I'm just letting you know, because I assume you're not the only one, Akbar. I was just kind of giving you a sense of how we arrived on there, and pretty much thinking what you were saying there about, like, yeah, it's he's an interesting character that feels a little underused, especially lately. We were actually I was looking up with everyone in stream earlier what Gambit's been up to, just because I had no idea, and that was interesting. But I don't think even really necessary, or to do a heist, like even to do a heist, having abruptly left the X mansion. Rogue appears shortly after and confronts him on this. Akbar saying, ears open, mouth closed. I actually really appreciate you guys, because it's given me ideas and helped me cue in certain directions and stuff. I'm not downplaying you. I just want to let you know, it's like, oh, you're right. That's why we're doing this kind of thing. I'm just trying to get a sense of the shape of this. And then I'm thinking, like, he convinces her to do the heist. Or maybe not. He escapes her and does the thing, managing to avoid Rogue in the process. Yeah, I'm kind of liking this so far, because it's kind of, yeah, let me write it out and then I'll talk about it a bit. Managing to avoid Rogue in the process. She catches up to him. Just as he reveals he wasn't actually working for the Thieves Guild. We learn they are much more serious, older, and dangerous than one might assume. Gambit knew this and was trying to avoid involving the X-Men. $75 Starfish says, Akbar, mouth open. I'm loving the interaction. Yeah, I agree. Like, your comments are definitely welcome here. Don't get me wrong. So, what I have here so far I feel is pretty cliche. But it's almost intentional, because we're kind of just setting up this solo story. And it's like, Gambit literally is going to be like, oh, I didn't want to involve the X-Men because I didn't want to endanger them. And we're almost misleading the audience and, like, dark horsing them into thinking, oh, hey, like, there's the X-Men aren't involved. This is just some solo story, and, like, we're not even going to see the X-Mansion kind of thing. We might be lucky enough to see the Blackbird at the end, but then it's like this explosive ending or something like that. Or almost, yeah, and then Starfish is saying, agree to some of the other 12 on the stream chimed in too. You know, some people are listening on their phones or whatever just as we're going, or don't know what to say and they're shy, and that's cool. But I do agree if anyone's got any other ideas or something, because I'm wondering, or they're just interested and don't know, because we're just in completely uncharted waters here. Akbar is saying, he didn't admonish me or anything, I just think I talk too much and sometimes I don't listen enough, is what he's saying. But I don't, you know, chat's chat for a reason. If it gets crowded and there's a lot of stuff, it's going to happen anyways. But I think people seem to be enjoying this, which is great. There's a good amount of viewers trickling in. So, because I'm wondering almost, and I'm very open to feedback for this part, because I'm wondering almost, like, if the Thieves Guild proves powerful, and maybe even has ties to the hand or something like that, or maybe even resembles the hand like an American the hand. I think, but then I'm thinking here, like maybe Quicksilver briefly appears to grab whatever MacGuffin they're stealing. Grab the artifact, let's say. Go and get the reinforcements. Like, just so then again we're misleading people. Oh, like there's a little Quicksilver cameo. That's kind of fun. But then I'm almost thinking Rogue and Gambit get captured. Maybe have an emotional scene or two. But one where Gambit is called out or something like that. Out and not let off the hook. Like, he's made a mistake here, and it's not like it's just okay. There's now, like, this issue they have to deal with, and Gambit apologizes. What I don't want is for it to just kind of feel like a typical story in that regard. Like, we need to talk. Like, I think there'll be a real discussion about, like, partnership. I don't know. I have some interesting thoughts for that part, let's say. Number 8, though, is where I think it gets really interesting for what is kind of being set up as like this solo comic book movie. The X-Men show up and literally save Rogue and Gambit. The X-Men are the hero of it. Like Gambit's not really the hero of this Gambit and Rogue part. Like, they're gonna participate, but really, the X-Men are the heroes of this story. And save the day, kind of. Save the day, our heroes. So, like, I don't know if you guys are getting the twist there, and I'm like I said, this is the part I'm really open to feedback about. I think it'd be really interesting if the arc of this story is Gambit needs to rely more on his partner and teammates, it would be really cool to follow that up a little bit and follow that through with them getting saved by the X-Men. I think that's like a cool little twist, and also kind of gets into that narrative arc a little bit. And then maybe even I'm going to put 9 here, like the X-Men get like a little closure with Gambit, like giving everyone a bit of character, giving the other X-Men a bit of character work, so they're not just appearing for an action scene. Like, we'll add a little bit. I'm writing that note almost just to myself, like, hey, at the end, add a little bit of substance. I'm gonna let you guys share your location without me broadcasting it too much, just so, like, you guys are just saying what town you're from and stuff, but that's really cool. Get into know each other, which I find really cute. Starfish seems to like that idea, and you guys, they're also talking about the World Cup, which I don't know about. I haven't been following the Olympics much either. 75 Starfish says Gambit's flirtation gets him into trouble and the X-Men have to step in. And it's almost his pride too. And I kind of, like, that's what I was saying, like, he really needs to be called out on this, because he's doing that thing we see in a lot of these superhero fictions, like stories and stuff, where it's like, no, this threat is dangerous, I'm not going to rely on my allies, I'm not going to rely on my romantic partner, I'm going to go off on my own and save the day myself. And in so many of those stories, it's almost treated like the right thing to do, and I want this movie to hammer that home, that it's not the right thing to do. And if you'll notice, as we've kind of outlined this story, all that political stuff has kind of taken a backseat. And I'm okay with that. That's a different script and story, and I think it might prove interesting around part 6, where, like, the Thieves Guild proves powerful and we learn how old they really are and stuff. I think that can kind of get into things, but I don't this isn't a political story. I think this is it. Like, I set out a couple of goals we could have. It could be like more historical and political or romantic and stuff, but we also wanted action. But we don't need to do everything. And I think dropping that politics in favor of this romantic story slash also almost simple arc of like, Gambit, you gotta learn to work with your team, but just sort of inverting it and being like, no, this superhero actually needs to work with his team, and too many of these other fictions let those superheroes get off the hook and having their solo adventures and abandoning their friends, even though they should rely on those friends. And I think I can write something that gets into that a little bit, and almost to the point where it's like, well, even the romance can take a little bit of a backseat to this emotional arc. I want that romance to be there, I want it to be present, but I think it also should kind of be about more like, hey, you, Gambit, used to be on your own. You used to be this thief. You used to like live this life and stuff, but you're part of this team now and you need to change. And maybe that's where this arc actually truly ends. Is Logan, I want bullets for this last little bit. Logan, in particular, but realistically everyone, everyone, meaning everyone being Storm, Quicksilver, and Polaris, all talk about how they used to be loners and stuff, because that's true of all these characters in like in their own little way and stuff. They used to be loners and such, but learned to change, and Gambit will have to as well. And what I really like about this is while the lesson is learned, it doesn't require Gambit to change within the course of a single story. It sets up the need for him to change and him deciding to do that, but he doesn't have to just make everything better by the end of the story. There's room for him to grow. Akbar says, as a writer, how much do you consider giving people what they want? Do you weigh how much compared to yourself what you yourself want to do? I think this little stream we've done so far is actually a great example of how I consider that, because I think it is worth considering that you're making a piece of entertainment, or whatever your audience is. When I was writing nonfiction science papers, that is a very different discussion. But for something like this, we want a piece of entertainment. We want something to be fun. But to me, it's less about what the world wants, because I kind of am often of the mindset of like, well, people can tell you what they want, but what they want and what they actually like and go for in the movie industry and stuff are often different things. And you kind of have to have that sense, which I think you're asking there, like Akbar. I think you're right. Like there is that, you have to weigh the two. And the way I do it personally is I think more about like, what would excite me? What would take me by surprise? What would leave me thinking, oh, this isn't just a typical superhero solo story? And these are the kind of things I think that would challenge that assumption that the viewer, would be making, and would leave me impressed and more excited about what's happening next in the story. So I think that hopefully answers it for you. Is I often think like, what would leave me excited on the screen? Why am I, like, for example, when we were in the early stages of developing this and we're talking about like Apocalypse and stuff like that, things I could do, or Deadly Genesis, I was a little overwhelmed with the idea of writing a script that complicated this early, and B, I also was like, I don't think that's what I want to see right out of the gate. I don't want another standard X-Men movie where they're just introducing Krakoa to us. I'd rather something like this, where it's like, oh, this is a solo superhero story that sets itself up to kind of be like one of those, like a Thor movie or something like that, but then just has that little wrinkle into it. It's like, no, we have a lesson that our character's going to learn. He has these allies and they're going to show up, but it is about Gambit, and it's all these little, like, the whole thing is written to avoid some of the traps I feel movies like Black Widow hit and fell into. And I'm not picking on that movie in particular. I've mentioned it a couple times, in part because it's the most recent movie I reviewed on this channel, but it also gets into what I'm thinking about. Black Widow works as a superhero movie, but it kind of falls behind a little bit when we consider that it's like this deep into the MCU and it's this weird prequel, but I think it also does kind of fall for some of these traps where it felt less entertaining than it could be because it just lacked a couple of ambitious ideas here and there to make it a little different. So what's different about this script? Well, we have the romance angle, which isn't unheard of in superheroes, but has been shied away from a little bit lately. We have just the sheer dynamic nature of Gambit as a character. So he has to be well cast, but I can't control that here. But we definitely want his character to shine through all of this. And we also have those little twists and turns. The fact that the X-Men are involved, the fact this isn't an origin story. These little things that other superhero movies have fallen for that make them a little less entertaining. Because, I want this to be a good product. It's a script I need to sell myself as a writer, but also just leave people wanting to see this script come to life. And I'm feeling good about this. We can modify and change things as we go along, but I do think this is the right way to go. Starfish says maybe include Iceman, who could have a thing for Gambit and is struggling to come out of the closet, but that is why he wants to follow Gambit on a quest. See, that's really interesting. If we're gonna do that, because I feel we're good on characters in terms of number of characters. So if we're putting an Iceman, we're taking someone else out, kind of thing. I'm almost curious if it would be more interesting to replace Rogue with Iceman. And I'm not saying go into romance between Iceman and Gambit, but that dynamic Starfish is describing is actually a little more interesting and a little less cliche than having Rogue involved. I almost want to leave that for now. Maybe even in this little document I'll make a note here for a potential sequel idea. Gambit and Iceman team up. It's not so much that I'm against that idea. It's like, well, it's that I like the romance element of it, and I think that helps it set it apart. And while that's true with Iceman, it's suddenly a different story, and it's almost like, well, we're all of a sudden this movie that story you're describing is Gambit and Iceman. It's not just Gambit. You can have a Gambit story where Rogue's a huge part of that story because she's such a huge part of his life, because a Rogue movie would similarly be fine to have Gambit be a huge part of it too. And I kind of view it that way. I think if we're gonna do Iceman and we're gonna have that admittedly interesting thing about like the closet and the struggle and stuff, that needs to take up at least half the movie in terms of like character work and stuff, which is very cool. That's why I'm leaving it for a sequel, because it's like, yeah, I actually do want to do that idea. So maybe if this becomes some runaway hit, hopefully I'll see that note and know, I already have an idea for what I want to do as a follow-up to this particular story, which I appreciate. So thank you. Akbar saying, I agree with you in large part. I like in terms of that writing stuff we were talking about earlier. I feel like if I'm entertaining myself, then I don't really have to worry about losing the audience. As I get older, I worry if I'm a bit out of touch. Yeah, I think the world of comics is actually full of examples of writers who continue to challenge themselves. Like that top 10 video I put out today is all about how when I talk about the Spawns, I talk about how Todd McFarlane keeps challenging himself and changing with the times. And I think that's how you do it. If you think that you're an expert and you don't need to learn or change anything, then you will, not you specifically, Akbar, but anyone will fall behind in the times and stuff. But I think it is, I kind of, at least, like I can't really control for that. It's an interesting point he has there, but I feel like I would be excited by this story, and I think that's I do believe most people would too, even people younger than me and stuff. That's where the confidence comes in, and it's an interesting thing to think about, and you do have to kind of wonder about like whether or not to be in touch. One almost wonders if a younger audience might more prefer the Gambit and Iceman story over the sole Gambit story. But I do think taking our time and maybe starting with Gambit before like something like that might be worth doing. Starfish is saying, I really like the idea of focusing on Remy, but including the other X-Men in the story. And that's the thing. I think like if we're gonna do Iceman, he can't be a secondary supporting character. That feels okay for Rogue, Storm, Wolverine, Quicksilver, and Polaris. I think these characters serve well, and though I didn't pick them that way, they actually work really well in this lesson because all of these characters kind of were on their own at one point, or are more independent characters compared to the average X-Men. So them all being the avatars that have to teach Gambit this lesson feels really fun to me, and feels like a fun, like, little bit of trivia and detail for comic book fans that they would appreciate. So I am feeling good about these characters. If you guys have other ideas for different replacements and stuff, that's fine. I just, like I said, it's got to be subbing in. So it's like, okay, if we're gonna put in Nightcrawler, he's got to take someone's place, for example, and I'd rather not. In part, I picked these characters somewhat deliberately. We've technically been introduced to all of these characters across X-Men media, but Polaris to me is the one new character that not everyone will necessarily know. But because everyone knows even Rogue, Storm, Wolverine, and Quicksilver really well, they're going to easily be recognizable, and we don't need to rely on them too much in terms of explaining that who they are. So that's where it's like, well, and then the other thing too is they can show off their powers in a fun way without it being a huge detraction. So something like Nightcrawler feels like, yeah, that's going to be a distraction because Nightcrawler's so fun and he's going to take the spotlight away. It's not that Logan isn't, but people have seen Logan enough, and same thing with Quicksilver, that him just showing up a little bit isn't a huge deal per se, if that makes sense. Akbar says, yeah, if McFarlane's looking to keep it fresh, then I'd say it's the right thing to do to challenge yourself where appropriate. He could easily coast off past successes. Well, and I think there's a lot of examples of writers who don't challenge themselves that way, that have kind of fallen to the wayside, or their quality and reliability has diminished a lot because they do coast off their successes. I think someone like Brian Michael Bendis might be a good example of that, where it's like, yeah, or Jeff Johns, because in those men's early days when they had something to prove, their writing was a lot better than these days when they have like a lot more sway over the companies they work at and no one's really questioning them anymore. Akbar saying, yeah, the Polaris on the new X-Men team, right? I don't remember seeing her when I was a kid in late 80s, early 90s. It is a reference to the new X-Men stuff. It's also just a fun addition that has appeared in the Gifted show before, but also I just think, the magnet powers are always good. And the idea is, for the diehard comic book fans, it'll be fun to have a little bit of a more obscure character that they'll recognize, but not like completely obscure so that no one's going to know who they are. And I think it's, they put Polaris on the new X-Men team, right? Oh, that's what he said. Yeah. And I picked her just because I picked characters that have, in the comic book, a little bit of history with Remy in one place or another, or feel like characters who are associated with him. Like they kind of represent similar dynamics, like Quicksilver or Polaris kind of. Then they also, these characters kind of came around the same time period, or feel like they were used in the same way, because Quicksilver's older than that, but I digress. I think I'm rambling a little bit, but the reason I'm doing that is because I don't actually want to start on the script quite yet. I want to take a little break before we do that, but I do want to have like at least something written. This ended up being a very carefully planned out script as it turns out, but it felt necessary. We're doing something very specific with this, and the tightly structured thing was Starfish saying, what's Gifted? Never heard of that, even though I'm an X-Men fan. It's a TV show that ran for a couple of seasons. Some people like it. I personally didn't. I felt the person who played Polaris was perfectly fine, though. Like, she was entertaining enough. And Akbar is saying, I knew she existed probably from the Marvel trading cards. I don't remember seeing in the comics I was reading. It feels like she turns up in like more X-Factory stuff and all that. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the character. I also don't feel it's super necessary for what we're using her for here. I know her a little bit from like the current X-Factor though and stuff, and she's a fun character in terms of like her history as like, I think she's still Magneto's daughter unless that got rewritten, and it's just she's what other team was she on back in the day? I don't know. I think it was another X Factor team, but it's all blurring together. We've talked about so many X-Men now under different continuities and stuff. So I am gonna take a little break and digest everything we've talked about a little bit. Uh, Kind of come up with a game plan. There is no way in hell we're going to be able to finish this script in a reasonable time. But I think we'll get the start of it and get the flow going just so you guys can kind of see the format, A, and B, so that you guys can kind of see the fruit of all this labor and what the script will look like. But and I don't know how long we're going to go. We'll kind of go from there. But for now, I'm going to just take a little break and I'll see you guys in a minute. Mm-hmm. Oh no, it's white colored text. Here, let's do that. Okay. Well, there we go. Oh, well, I'm going to need that too, but we also... So, let's talk a little bit about screenwriting. I have a very fun screenwriting program called Trelby here that's useful for that. I find it's very useful for... Oh, yes. Setting up... what's it called? Well, okay, so I used to use this other program. I think it's just called Gambit. I'm never good at titles. I used to use, like, this online program, but I found, okay, we aren't doing that. Okay for now. Oh, here's what I'll do. Hang on. I want to actually set that up because it's good to have your stuff on there. But you guys don't need to see that. No offense or anything, but I do not need to publicly broadcast my phone number. Even email, I'm a little wary of. We have like a Comic Island email for that stuff. But anyways, you don't see the title screen on this, but that's okay. So this is Trelby. This is a newer program that I've only used once before for that Batman script, but I actually prefer it a little bit. I think it is a little cleaner than the one I used to use, and it's very quick to move through. So we start, because I have the title page, now I actually might go with Act 1. Is that right? It looked really off, but okay. Welcome to... That's weird. I think that's... I guess that works. Yeah, it's fine. Akbar is talking about some of the comics he's been enjoying lately, including Tom King with Nightwing and Chip Zdarsky's work, and the current Iron Man run, which is pretty cool. Those are all solid choices. I'm way behind on everything, so I don't know. I haven't had as much time for comic book reading lately. And then Akbar is saying, title like Queen's Gambit and make about some royal family who use chess strategy somehow because of the Netflix show with Anna Taylor-Joy. I don't hate that for like a title of one of these act breaks, which aren't necessarily used for anything other than just basically denoting chapters for the script, but I do think that's a good idea. So, how do we open this? Like, we got a good solid outline here, and all I really have is he arrives in New Orleans to do a heist. And I guess the action really kind of starts on 2, but... Well... Akbar saying Iron Man's villain or heavy is Korvac, pretty big hitter to use without it being an event, curious to see how it turns out. Well, that's cool. Is Zdarsky writing that? Because he's been doing a lot lately. So I'm wondering though if we start, like, definitely exterior, and I'm thinking like establishing shot. Establishing shot. Well, you know, scripts can be as specific or as broad as we need, really. Okay, so let's start. Exterior New Orleans. And I do feel like he arrives during the day. Jeez. Should be able to broadcast to us that we are in New Orleans without relying on any text. the distinct inform the audience for. So what we are not starting with is a little text screen at the bottom saying New Orleans, present day. Like, no. We don't need any of that, because all we really need is just, like, shots of New Orleans. It's such a distinct city. It will do it on its own a million times over, that we really don't need to say, like, New Orleans or whatever. And I think, like, what I'm envisioning next is just sort of Gambit happily walking down the street. And there's clothes. He looks American. Or not American, an X-Men. X-Men already. Alright. Starfish is saying, I haven't read comics since the 90s. My wife bought me some X-Men comics 10 years ago, but that's it. Irish says, I won't go into the current books too much. We're here to talk about writing. Oh, that's okay. I'll have to take a look at it, though. Oh, he says it's Chris on the current run, the guy who made the Halt and Catch Fire TV show. That's really cool. I'll tell you what, though. I agree with you, but I am going to add Iron... Here's what we'll call it. Cantwell. Alright. That sounds fun, and we'll do a stream on that one day. Well, it's cool that Akbar saying he recently got into reading comic books. It's always encouraging to hear and stuff, I've been reading them pretty consistently for a while, but COVID's really jammed me up because the comic book store, up until recently, hasn't been reliably open. Alright. And now I'm wondering, like, I really like that scene. I think it's in Ragnarok where Thor takes a selfie. It's so cute. But I don't want to just steal that scene. So I think I'm going to go for a little more sincerity. Father and son approach the man. Okay. So we have different types of text for each thing. We have our little scene here that establishes not only what time it is, but where we are. And then all these little action notes that kind of let the whoever is filming this know what's happening. So that's what, and it's pretty rough. It doesn't really have to be polished language. I find it's trying to be as descriptive as possible. Sort of. It's as descriptive as I feel the need to be. You can also kind of leave a lot of creative freedom for this entire cast and crew out there who are in theory going to take this script and turn it into something. We're writing under that assumption, even though obviously this is mostly just like for my portfolio and for showing how screenwriting goes and stuff. But I can also be very vague. So when I say a series of establishing shots should be able to broadcast to us like we're in New Orleans without relying on any text on screen, I'm telling the director or whoever in theory, like, we don't need a little text coming by saying we're in New Orleans. You do that through the shots you take around New Orleans. And I'm not really specifying what they are, though, but I do say, like, the streets and distinct architecture should inform the audience for us, to give them a little idea of what I see in my head. And to me, that's enough. it can look quite a few different ways under those auspices, but it's also to kind of encourage, hopefully, the crew to go out to New Orleans and find some cool shots of the city before we find where we want to shoot this bit with Gambit or whatever. And I don't have any aspirations about this coming to be real, but we have to work under that assumption. Next we go to character. And actually I can shorthand that with little tabs and stuff, which is what I like about this thing. Akbar saying local comic book store, like, for him was closed too, and thankfully they've opened up as new books were coming out again. Glad they stayed in business. Yeah, it's the same situation with us. It's just been small because my local store is in this mall thing, so it was a little slow for them to open back up and be allowed to. So the father's going to come up to him and say, like, and we're all even that little detail, excited and eager. Like, I know, the X-Men are supposed to be hated and feared and stuff, but we're not really playing up that angle much in this story, A. And B, I don't think it's terribly realistic in certain contexts. Lots of people probably love the X-Men in their world, but also I think Gambit's really popular in New Orleans in particular. And so he's going to say, like, Gambit. Are you really? Or something like, oh my god. Or maybe even, yeah, you just gotta fiddle around with what, like, it sounds like in your head. I'm thinking he's just gonna go, hey, Gambit. Mind if, not of. If. Son. Akbar was saying, even though I'm a massive movie fan, I've never looked into the process of how a script is written. I'm very ignorant of how you structure one, beyond common sense, or a glance at a script here and there. Well, I kind of was hinting at it a little earlier, but it's very flexible. Right now I'm kind of just breaking down the dialogue, because you want it to all kind of just flow and feel natural. Currently I'm debating if it's no problem me, or no problem, friend. This is where we get into the, like, dialect issue. I know what and how people have written Gambit before. I don't know how accurate it is, though. Like, is he super Cajun? Are we gonna play that up at every example? Is he going to refer to Rogue as Mal Cherie? I think a lot of that is going to be down to, like, whoever ends up playing him and the direction behind it. So not too worried about it, but I think I'm going to write it Cajun and French and play it up for now, and then if it doesn't work, yeah, it doesn't work. But I digress. He picks up the child. Child imposes. Starfish is saying it's work, dude. It is, and I'm kind of like letting it ride for now, for the moment, on the assumption I can refine some of the dialogue later if need be. I probably will look up a little bit of Cajun, but I think I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna play it up, because if it's not working in script or whatever, like on set or whatever, they can change it. Like, we can't control that sort of thing, and I'd rather work under the assumption it is a heavy accent, because that's what makes it, like, that's what makes Gambit different as a character. Akbar saying, good question. Do you want to go the Scotty route, or do you go for a genuine, realistic portrayal of a Cajun? I definitely want the latter. I don't want it to be cartoonish, and that's why I hesitated for a minute. And I think I will probably listen to some Cajun people talk very closely in 2021 and get a sense of what that sounds like and what words are used, how often they hit that, like, slang and stuff. And I also have to think about how much that's still affecting Gambit at this point in his life. Like, maybe he is a little westernized, like, he's been a little X-Men and it has lost his accent and that identity a little bit. Maybe that can be confronted by someone in New Orleans at some point. Akbar says, it really appealed to people. Non-comic fans seem to really remember his Cajun elementals from the cartoon. I think for, like, kids and stuff, they've never seen it and they don't know about it, which is so interesting and fun. So that's why it's, like, worth playing up. Anyways, I had to very briefly look up what the name of this child would be, and I decided it would be Mikey, named after one of the artists who co-created Gambit. Mike Collins. That sort of thing writes itself, but it's just easy, and I hate coming up with names, so that's where that sort of thing is an easy little reference. Very nice to meet. Thanks, Mr. Gambit. This makes me laugh. I don't know. Please. Mr. I don't have a good internal voice for Gambit right now. Maybe I should go back and... Maybe I should honestly just model it a little bit after those cartoons rather than realism. Mr. Gambit was my father's name. I just like that. That's funny. You can call me Remy. What's it called? Oh yeah, Mikey's gonna say. So, like, see how it auto completes that stuff for me? I really like that and appreciate it. Yeah, Akbar's like, Mikey, eh? Cowabunga dude. Well, I assume, like, the kid's name's Michael, so he probably wanted something like that, but then it's a reference to the author more. I assume it'll go right by most people along those lines anyways, and it's just a little bit of trivia. Oh, petite. That's perfect. That's right. I appreciate that. Thank you. I was gonna... You don't even need to name it twice. Yeah, Akbar's like watching X-Men cartoon. It might be good just to get his voice going at some point internally. But the other thing I wanted to do is the father's going to say... Welcome back to New Orleans. There. So, this wasn't for nothing. It's a couple of things. It's on the very base level establishing Gambit's code name and first name. The Mr. Gambit thing might, like, it's just a joke about, like, that layout, even though it doesn't make sense because it's his code name, and that's why I like it. Like, it's just a funny little nod. But also to tell people a few things. We're communicating. He's part of the X-Men. He doesn't live here all the time. He's back in New Orleans. End of the scene. We don't need to do any more than that. Gambit starts to walk away, which we'll actually put up here. Okay, and honestly, that's it for part 1. Like I said, I'm a big believer in this not having to be any longer than it needs to be. It very well could be like the length of a television episode, for example. And we all know how much Disney loves Disney Plus, so it could very well be like something like that. It's as long as it needs to be. Now that's not to say that's the end of the first act. Acts are going to be large chunks of it. I'm doing that early because I have a feeling this isn't going to just be short and simple. But I digress. So we're actually going to set it to scene, interior, and I keep envisioning the next scene kind of taking place in a bar, but I'm not fully sold on that yet. It's where Rogue's going to confront him. So I guess we also have to wonder, how does she even find him? But I kind of am putting internally this idea together of like either Cerebro, but I think the better bet is Rogue borrowing powers from someone who can track down these abilities, which is kind of interesting. Okay, so that can still take place in a bar then. So New Orleans, bar. We'll say dusk at least, just to kind of provide some connective tissue to everything, but, you know, bar is usually a night thing. Akbar said, I'd love to just, he's feeling jealous because it's just, love to spend time just writing, really immerse myself in the process. Well, I thought it'd be fun to share it with people for that reason, because it is an interesting experience. Like I said, there's no way we're going to do this all now or within a certain thing, but I wanted to kind of get the ball rolling and stuff. So, we cut to a relatively run down bar. Gambit is seated inside, enjoying a drink. And Akbar says, it's probably good to wrestle with the innate silliness of comic book character names, maybe. Have someone call him Mr. Gambit, if I heard you right. Yeah, well, that's what the kid calls him. And then Gambit says, please, Mr. Gambit was my father's name. You can call me Remy. Which is a funny play on that back and forth everyone's heard before. But it gets into this. It's a little joke about that. And Gambit's making that joke. And maybe I should even, kind of indicate that. Or maybe chuckling or something. It's like an easy little, he's just kind of joking around with the kid kind of thing. And I think that's fun. But it also kind of teaches the audience right away Gambit's names, which is just a fun little extra thing because of the code names. But I need to look up something here is the idea. I got a little held up on something. Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering if they have a slang for another. Not really, but this is a very helpful page with a bunch of other ideas. Okay, well, Coolion. It's actually a thing for a child, so that's a freebie. So I think I'm gonna have him say "ça c'est bon," and she's like, "That's good." Of course, none of the accents are gonna really go through this, and I don't really care to do. So the bartender's gonna call him a tea man. Just like a little, we're adding a little bit of New Orleans slang. I don't know how accurate this all is, but it does seem to be a local radio station in Louisiana. So I'm gonna use it a little bit here and there. And like I said, if it's not authentic or something, someone or I can come along and fix it a bit later. The T-Man thing's a reference to like him being an X-Man, but calling it T-Man. I wonder if I should almost just skip that, just because we want it to be apparent that, hey, Gambit's an X-Man and people know that. So I think I will go with that for now. But it might actually have been more realistic for him to say T-Man, kind of like just sort of jokingly calling him Little Man, like Little X-Man's almost, or something like that. But I think that would work in that context of like the bartender just sort of being friendly. Okay, so although the implication of this so far is Gambit's in a good mood. I'm sorry, I'm just getting quiet. I'm just trying to flow between a few different thoughts. Down's another. I can talk a lot about typing. Getting a little tipsy. And it's starting to get a little tipsy, we'll say. And is starting to get a little tipsy. And then I think it's around here we kind of want Rogue to come in. Okay, so okay, there we go. I had to think about this for a minute. Suddenly, because I was like, well, because you know, in my head it's just like the door bursts open. It's like, yeah, we've seen that before. Like that's a little boring. Suddenly, but this is Rogue, right? The door goes flying. Goes flying. It and debris or slamming with so much force slams it to Thanks for joining us, Starfish. I appreciate all the contributions and stuff. Oh, Akbar's the one leaving. Sorry, but we do appreciate you. Oh, and then Starfish was quoting Star Wars in this. I was thinking, yeah, like the door just goes flying into the bar. But yeah, I'd appreciate Akbar, yeah, all the stuff you contributed too. Both of you guys. It has been great. people in it. So you do have to be descriptive where appropriate. Like, we don't want a ton of people. Wow. Rogue emerges at the doorway. Shut it. I realize she's committing insane destructive process. Akbar's like, for what it's worth, thanks for sharing the process. Yeah, I feel people will be interested in this as we go along and stuff and learn how one goes about screenwriting and creating something. It is an interesting dynamic we're creating here because Rogue is doing property destruction, and to me, it's running like a cartoon here almost, where it's like, yeah, like the destruction's happening or whatever, and like it's almost aggressive of Rogue to do that. But well, we'll kind of add context to why she does that, because like Gambit just disappeared on them, so she wants to know what the hell's going on, and she's upset. And then also the X-Men can pay for it, so we'll add a little thing maybe near the end about that. But what I like about that is the bartender, like, he's not gonna fight this. He's just gonna immediately, like, the bartender immediately goes quiet, cowering away. And opting for any sort of confrontation. Threat. So, Gambit, annoyed. Oops, not Gambit. Rogue interrupts with furious, but also hurt. Man can't abandon. Go. Wake up. And then, like, I feel like he just starts talking over, like, just talking right by her. Akbar says, whatever you do, put Gambit in a silly headstock for a small bit. Probably a bad idea for a movie or TV show, but I'd have a good laugh. I like that. Akbar says, referencing his costume, hair popping out, X-Men, hand socks make me laugh, and I think what a real person would look like wearing one. Okay, no more empty threats, adios. I like that, though. Maybe a nod to some of his old costumes in some way, like while he's doing the heist or something. So, the issue is here. At some point, Gambit's gonna talk about, he's got all these barriers up, but he's got to deal with the fact that he's like, well, there's something the X-Men don't understand. But I think his first line of defense would be like deflection and just getting her past that, or something like that. Now it is. He reaches behind the counter. Bottle and glass and starts pouring something for Rogue. A drink for Rogue. And Rogue's gonna be like, don't steal. You can't do that. Rogue's gonna be like, hey, you can't do that. Gambit. Like, what's the word for it? Just baffled, we'll say, at the wreck of. He's gonna be like, excuse? More? Well, I think we're past it. Well, yeah, no. So I was gonna be like, well, we had no idea what happened to you. So who can track down powers on their own? I need a mutant who can do that. Oh yeah, Caliban. Okay, yeah, that's just a fine reference on its own. Just look down at this. I like this. This is feeling like a couple arguing and stuff. I'm sorry I'm not reading it all out loud as we go. That's an interesting dynamic to it, but I just yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's kind of an indication we need to wrap up this stream when this scene's done, because I'm kind of getting into the writing. I have a clear path, and I think you guys kind of get the idea. We did a whole outline and everything, so I think maybe we'll call it there in a moment. But let me just kind of think this up, because she's like, well, we had no idea what happened to you, so she had to borrow Caliban's powers just to track him down, and then she's arriving here not knowing what to think, and maybe he's being held hostage and been kidnapped or something. But as Gambit's pointing out, like, I got that's the genius. And he's like rightfully pointing out she's pissed and annoyed with him and here in rampage mode for a reason. Like, so there's something to it. I also have no idea how to end this scene. Oh wait, I kind of do. Oh, that's brilliant. hang on. So earlier she did refer to herself as his girlfriend, but I think I'm actually going to cut that. It needs to say you can't just abandon the team to go across the country without notice or any explanation. Any explanation. And then it's kind of implied that they have this relationship, but Gambit, being Gambit, probably isn't super like, oh yeah, we're boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, it's more complicated than that. Okay, hang on. Like, so, I adore you. You know what? I need to get. Yeah, and you know what I mean, because we're subverting these cliches. I'm even going to go as far as like gonna have him say like, I don't want any of you to get hurt or for any of them to drag me down. And Rogue's gonna say that's and you know it. What are you of that I or Logan can't, but then she's gonna kind of trail off here. Rogue looks down at her cup. Realizing it is glowing a faint purple. Yeah, so, because he passed her that, right? So we're gonna have a little bit of fun here. The cup suddenly ignites. Ignites with a burst of kinetic energy. Rogue is knocked off the bar stool and clean onto her back. Specify here. Yeah, we're seated inside at the bar. Enjoying the drink. The force of the sudden attack is enough to stun her, but as Gambit is well aware, is not nearly strong enough to actually harm her. To actually harm someone like Rogue. Gambit calmly gets up. So that's a fun way for us to first see his powers in this story. It's unexpected, subverted, and it's used against his girlfriend, basically. Yep, and we'll just keep embracing the cliche for this part, because he's literally falling into that trap, and this whole movie is going to be about how wrong this behavior is. I'm just going to embrace it. But I need to do this, says Gambit. Yes. And he just runs off. Grabbing... Oh, hey, why aren't you... What? Grabbing his staff, he runs off. Butter. Say stuttering. winded, actually, is probably the better word. Winded, struggling to get back on her. No? Hey. Why are you being weird? Oh, because you're not. There we go. It's being weird. And I kind of want her stumbling on like saying honey or something. And just maybe end with her shouting. Oops. Stop that. How do I... There we go. We... to outside as... someone rogue can be heard indistinctly shouting after him as the camera pans up and we get our title card and opening, which is, of course, yeah, actually that's probably good. I'm gonna do an act break here that's just gonna be entitled Gambit. Nope. Don't do that. And then we start our next scene after that. Okay, so like I said, I kind of felt the need to probably wrap it up after that, but that is a fun start and a good idea of like how we develop an idea and how to process it. It's 4 pages, which isn't too bad either, and kind of gives us a pretty solid opening, I think. I like that I went so far as to have Gambit use his powers for the first time against Rogue. I think that interestingly sets the tone, and the idea of him not playing around. Like, like, he's... What am I trying to say? He's like... No, I didn't want that either. Oh my god. Okay. Not, there we go. That's all I wanted. Like, he doesn't want anything to do with the X-Men in this story. He's willing to stun Rogue, probably under the assumption that, like, Caliban's powers will wear off enough in time that he can hide from her or something. Maybe I'll even say that. That's too wordy. And I do kind of wonder. Like, there is something to that, though. Like, does she trust him to do that? And I think she'll kind of confront him with, like, well... Okay, I need to put this in my notes. Hold on a second. Like, she's got... Because, like, here's what I'm thinking. Gambit feels like Rogue should trust him to do a solo mission like this. Rogue points out, like, if he really felt safe, confident about the mission, he would have been upfront about it from the beginning. Sorry, I have to type this. I'm just explaining it as I type with you guys. Rather than sneak off. Because I want Gambit to be wrong in this argument and stuff. I think that's the central lesson of this movie. And that's the issue, is like, if he really thought he could do this on his own and didn't need anyone else, he should have told that to everyone and communicated it from the beginning, and instead it becomes this chase and this weird thing, almost like a forced superhero story that we might see in other stories that let characters get away with behavior like this. But the whole focus of the script is going to be holding this character to account, which is why we kind of are like 2 scenes in, Rogue and Gambit are in New Orleans and they're doing stuff. Like, we're establishing things really quick because the thesis of this story is why this behavior is wrong. Scott says, Marvel is ruining everything. Well, like, in creating scripts and doing things, like when we think that they're doing stuff wrong like that, I kind of want to create these things to show how I would write them and where I think we can do better and stuff like that. And I don't know if this is better or not, but I certainly enjoyed writing it. So thanks for joining me, everyone, and we'll see you next time here on Comic Island.